After helping my husband, Grant, build his business from the ground up, I settled into life as a stay-at-home mom. For my daughter Nina's 10th birthday, I wanted to go all out and booked a luxury banquet at the Ritz Carlton. But when I handed over my card, the receptionist gave me a strange look. "Mrs. Miller, I'm sorry, but this card doesn't even have $500 left on it." Embarrassed and confused, I went home to confront Grant. He looked at me with an apologetic smile. "The company is bidding on a huge project right now. The new director is incredibly greedy, and I've had to spend a lot under the table to smooth things over. Once the cash flow is back, I promise I'll throw Nina the biggest, most glamorous party anyone has ever seen." I played the part of the supportive wife and told him I understood. But the moment he turned his back, I started auditing our assets. You see, the new director he was talking about was actually my father. And I knew for a fact there were no new bids happening this month. I wanted to see exactly who he was really spending our money on. This card was meant for our joint family expenses, and it had over $200,000 in it just last month. The transaction history had been deliberately scrubbed, so I went directly to the bank to pull the full records. The largest expense was actually at the same Ritz-Carlton I had just visited. $120,000, listed as a birthday gala package. "Daddy must be planning a surprise for us, right? Mommy, let's go see. We can surprise him too." Looking into Nina's innocent eyes, I couldn't bring myself to think the worst of Grant just yet. When we reached the grand ballroom, I immediately saw Grant in a tailored tuxedo, laughing and chatting with guests at the door. A woman in a stunning red gown was clinging to his arm, looking every bit like his perfect match. It was Vivian Shaw, Grant's secretary and one of the founding members of the company. "Mrs. Miller, your son looks just like Grant. He's going to be quite the heartbreaker when he grows up. Truly, everyone in the office envies you too. To have such a beautiful family and still be so head over heels for each other is rare." Listening to the guests' compliments, I realized there was a young boy standing between them. His features were a near-perfect reflection of Grant's. "Daddy, the name on the sign is wrong. I'm Nina, not Connor." Nina suddenly let go of my hand and ran toward Grant. I followed her gaze and saw a large welcome sign next to the entrance. It read, "Happy 7th birthday to our beloved son Connor." Before I could process it, there was a loud thud. Vivian had reached out and shoved Nina to the ground. "Where did this brat come from? Have you no manners at all?" I rushed forward to pick up Nina. When I saw the blood trickling from her scraped knee, my rage instantly incinerated my logic. "Grant Miller, you're using our family money to support a mistress and a secret son, and now you're letting her hurt Nina?" My voice trembled with fury as I pulled my sobbing daughter into my arms. Vivian scoffed, muttering under her breath, "What family money? Every cent was earned by Grant and me through years of hard work. Some people get so used to being a trophy wife that they forget they're just a guest in this house." The surrounding guests began to whisper, their eyes darting between us. Is this some side piece trying to make a scene? Bringing a kid to crash a birthday party? The audacity of these homewreckers nowadays. Showing up right in front of the real wife. How shameful. Exactly. And the kid is just a girl. She'll probably grow up to be just like her mother. Those judgmental, mocking stares felt like needles stabbing into Nina and me. I screamed at them. "What are you talking about? Vivian is the mistress. That boy is the one who shouldn't be here." A few people in the crowd chuckled. A pot-bellied man swirled his drink and spoke up. "Vivian has been by Grant's side for years. Everyone knows she's the one who really runs the show." Another woman chimed in. "Grant and his wife are so devoted to each other. This woman probably just saw how rich he is and decided to try her luck with a scam." I looked Grant dead in the eye, my voice cold. "Grant Miller, tell them. Who am I?" Grant finally spoke. He wore a patronizing, weary smile as he turned to the guests. "I apologize for the disturbance, everyone. This is my nanny June. She reads too many romance novels and has developed some delusions." He turned back to me, his eyes flashing with a sharp warning. "June, take Nina back home and get some rest. Stop making a fool of yourself in public." I felt like I'd been hit by a freight train. I couldn't believe this man, who had shared my bed for 12 years, would give me such a ridiculous identity to my face. Seeing that Grant was backing her, Vivian's confidence soared, and her voice grew louder. "June, I know being a single mom is hard, but you can't just make things up. Tell you what, I go home now, and I'll have the house manager cut you a check for 3 months extra salary." The ballroom erupted in laughter. "So the nanny wants to be the lady of the house? How pathetic. People will do anything for money these days." The little girl looked sad, but what do you expect with a mother like that? A brat raised by a trashy woman will always know how to fake tears. She's not innocent. Vivian smiled triumphantly. She knelt down and whispered to her son. "Connor, look closely. You have to study hard, or you'll end up like these people and nothing but clowns." Connor tilted his chin up, his gaze filled with a spitefulness that didn't belong on a 7-year-old's face. "You trashy woman. How dare you yell at my mommy?" He reached out and gave me a violent shove. Caught off guard, I stumbled back a few steps, nearly falling over Nina. Connor looked exactly like a spoiled little prince. My dad said the Miller Group will be all mine one day. What are you, you little stray? You think you can take my daddy away from me? You're going to be a servant just like your mom. The guests' laughter became even more piercing. Someone even started clapping. The young Master Miller has spirit. He's going to go far. Just then a few hotel staff members walked past with trays. One of them was the manager who had served me before. He saw me and purposely raised his voice so his colleagues could hear. Oh look, isn't that the Mrs. Miller who tried to book $1,000 a plate dinner, but didn't even have $500 in her account? I told you, some people love to play pretend. They think they're high society until they have to slink away in shame. Vivian let out a sharp laugh. Too poor to even have $500? No wonder she's here causing trouble. The pot-bellied man from earlier waddled over. His greasy eyes traveled up and down my body, his tone suggestive. You know, for a nanny, she's actually got a nice figure. And the kid is pretty cute too. Grant clearly isn't interested, so why not come with me? I'll give you $3,000 a month and take care of your housing. How's that? You won't have to worry about $500 ever again. I'm being a pretty nice guy here, right? The crowd roared with laughter. Mr. Miller is being generous. But is she even worth $3,000? Vivian leaned into Grant, joining in the mockery. I turned to my husband and demanded, Grant Miller, are you really going to let them insult Nina and me like this? Grant watched with a blank expression, as if I were a total stranger. Once the laughter died down, he finally spoke, his voice cold and impatient. June, stop embarrassing yourself. Today is my son's birthday. Take your daughter and leave, or I'll have security drag you out. Nina was shaking violently in my arms. Her small hands gripped my coat, so tightly her knuckles were white. She buried her face in my chest, terrified of the hateful faces surrounding us. Mommy, is what they're saying true? Hearing my daughter's terrified whisper, I felt my heart breaking into a million pieces. 12 years of marriage, and this was how he chose to trample over us in public. No, no. Nina, don't listen to them. I covered Nina's ears, my heart heavy with bitterness. How was I supposed to explain this to her? When Grant first started his business, we lived in a tiny office space that wasn't even 100 square feet. We couldn't afford employees, so I did everything, the admin, the accounting, the logistics. To help him get clients, I swallowed my pride and begged every relative and friend I had. I remember the day he signed his first big contract. He was so excited he spun me around and used his first profit to buy me a designer dress. I saw how happy he was, so I never told him that the big client was actually a lifelong friend of my uncle. Later, when the company took off and I got pregnant with Nina, Grant insisted I stay home. I'll take care of you from now on, he had promised. You've suffered enough for me. It's time you enjoyed your life. But look at us now. I looked down at my old dress, which I had been wearing for 3 years. Meanwhile, Grant was in a bespoke suit, and Vivian was draped in luxury brands. They stood together, soaking up the admiration of the crowd, looking like the perfect couple. And when I was called a nanny, not a single person doubted it. June, honey, I know life is hard, Vivian said, pulling a stack of cash from her designer handbag. She held it out to me with a condescending smirk. I don't have much cash on me, but here's $2,000. I don't know what your problem is, but take it. Buy a bus ticket back to whatever small town you came from. Maybe use the change to see a psychiatrist. As she stepped closer, she leaned in so only I could hear her. June Harrison, so what if you met Grant first? The one who isn't loved is the real mistress. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, she suddenly let out a fake gasp and loosened her fingers. The bills slapped against my face before fluttering to the floor. Vivian didn't look sorry at all. Her eyes were full of spite. Oops. My hand slipped. The greasy VP spoke up again. Mrs. Miller is so classy. Truly a woman of high character. Grant glanced at me briefly and commanded, pick it up and get out. I started laughing, a cold, sharp sound. You think $2,000 can get rid of me? Grant, how do you think your startup landed those massive projects back in the day? Every cent you've spent on Vivian and this bastard son is marital property. If I want it back, I'll take every last dime. Vivian sneered, looking at me like I was insane. What a vivid imagination. June, you should write books. Maybe you can recommend some of those alpha billionaire novels you're obsessed with. The 1950s are over, honey. Nobody cares about being the legal wife anymore. But I had hit a nerve with Grant. His face turned livid as he stepped toward me. June, don't you dare. Slap. The sound of my hand hitting his face echoed through the hall. Grant Miller, if you dare insult me again, or try to put another fake label on me, I will see you in court tomorrow. Grant was stunned by the slap. When he recovered, his eyes burned with a murderous rage. He grabbed my neck, his knuckles turning white from the force. His voice was a low, vicious snarl. You think I won't hit a woman? Don't push your luck, you pathetic BA. In the corner where the guests couldn't see clearly, His grip tightened. I felt the air being squeezed out of me. My vision started to go black. I clawed at his wrists, but it was useless. Just as I thought I might actually die right there, Vivian stepped forward with a fake, concerned look. Grant, honey, she isn't worth the trouble. Don't hurt your hands on someone so beneath you. Grant finally let go. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. The look in his eyes just now told me everything. For a split second, he really wanted to kill me. Vivian tenderly touched the red mark on Grant's cheek. She even stood on her tiptoes and kissed him in front of everyone. There, don't be angry. It's Connor's birthday. Don't let someone like her ruin our mood. Grant's expression softened as he wrapped his arm around Vivian's waist. Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A projector turned on, and photos began to play on the big screen. The screen showed Connor's life from the moment he was born. His birth, his first steps, his first day of school. Grant was there for every single moment. But in my daughter Nina's life, Grant was almost always absent. Nina and Connor shared the exact same birthday. I realized that since the year Connor was born, Nina had never seen her father on her birthday again. Connor made a face at Nina, his voice full of malice. You said he's your daddy, but where are your pictures? I don't see you up there. Nina's face fell. She whispered to me, Mommy, am I really a stray? I shook my head, but then the screen showed their family vacation photos. When I saw the background of a few of them, I froze. One photo showed them on a luxury cruise ship, faces pressed together lovingly. I remembered that ship. It was for our 5th wedding anniversary. Grant had told me he booked a romantic getaway just for us. He had actually booked a ticket for Vivian on the same ship. Then there was a photo at Disney World. Grant and Vivian were hugging tightly. The date on the photo was the exact same day Grant had been working late, while I took Nina to the park alone. I finally understood. Every time we went out, Grant always had a last-minute meeting he couldn't miss. My entire marriage, something I had been so proud of, was full of these disgusting holes. While I was still in shock, Connor suddenly ran over and slapped Nina across the face. Your mommy hit my daddy, so I'm going to hit you. Nina's head snapped to the side, her cheek turning bright red instantly. She was a head taller than Connor, and her first instinct was to fight back. But Vivian grabbed Nina's wrists, squeezing them so hard the skin bruised. Her voice was harsh. How can a girl be so violent? You have absolutely no upbringing. Seeing that Nina was restrained, Connor lunged at her, kicking and punching her. The boy didn't know his own strength, and soon bruises started appearing on Nina's arms. Nina's eyes filled with tears, but she bit her lip, refusing to let out a sound. Stop it. I tried to pull Connor away, but Grant grabbed my arm in a vice grip. They're just kids playing. Don't interfere. Connor is smart. He knows what he's doing. She'll be fine. I couldn't take it anymore. I screamed at him. That is your daughter. Grant Miller, that is your own flesh and blood. How can you stand there and watch them hurt her? How can you be so heartless? Grant just turned his head away, avoiding my eyes. His voice was quiet, but his words were like venom. He's my son too. At that moment, Connor kicked Nina hard in the stomach. Nina doubled over in pain, her face turning pale. Nina! I shrieked, my heart nearly stopping. Nina tried to protect her stomach, but Vivian kept her pinned down, leaving her completely defenseless. Connor got even more excited. He raised his foot to kick Nina's injured knee. That's enough. I finally wrenched my arm free from Grant's grip. I threw myself forward, shoved Connor aside, and pulled Nina into my lap. Nina was shaking in my arms, her small hands clutching my clothes. Her voice was weak. Mommy, it hurts. Connor had been knocked into a nearby table. He started wailing at the top of his lungs. Vivian looked like her world was ending. My baby boy. Connor is the heir to the Miller Group. If he's hurt, you'll never be able to pay for it. Grant saw Vivian and the boy crying and raised his hand to strike me. June Harrison, how can you be so vicious? Just as his hand was about to hit me, the ballroom doors swung open with a bang. A middle-aged man in a black jacket stepped in. He had an aura of sheer authority. His eyes were sharp, and he radiated power. A secretary with a briefcase followed closely behind. The pot-bellied VP, who had been so rude to me, suddenly turned into a groveling mess. He ran over to the man, bowing and scraping. Commissioner Harrison. What an honor. Grant, let me introduce you. This is the commissioner I told you about. He just transferred to our state this year. Grant stared at the man, his face turning ghostly white. Father-in-law. Holding my injured daughter, I looked at the familiar face, and my tears finally broke free. I choked out a single word. Dad. The grand ballroom went so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the air. Conditioning unit 50 feet above us. Grant's hand froze in midair, suspended inches from my face. His eyes were wide, bulging out of his head as if he were looking at a ghost. The color drained from his face so fast he looked as though he had been bled dry on the spot. See Commissioner Harrison. Grant stammered, his voice sounding thin, brittle, and pathetic. My father, Commissioner Arthur Harrison, didn't look at Grant. His sharp, steel gray eyes moved slowly across the room, taking in every single detail. He saw my old, worn dress. He saw the faint red handprints turning blue around my neck where Grant had choked me moments ago. And then his gaze dropped to his 10-year-old granddaughter, Nina, who was sitting on the floor, clutching her bruised stomach and bleeding knee, crying silently in my lap. A terrifying, suffocating pressure filled the room. The commissioner didn't yell. He didn't scream. He simply took 3 slow steps forward. The pot-bellied VP, who had offered me $3,000 a month to be his mistress, suddenly gasped for air and took 3 steps back, dropping his wine glass onto the plush carpet. It shattered with a dull clack. "Arthur," I whispered, my voice raspy from being choked. "You're early." "I was nearby, sweetheart," my father said softly, his voice dropping its terrifying weight as he crouched down beside us. His large, calloused hand gently touched Nina's forehead, his thumb wiping a tear from her cheek. "Secretary told me you were trying to book a room here for Nina's birthday. I thought I'd come by and see my favorite girl." He looked at Nina's bleeding knee, then lifted the hem of her shirt slightly to see the purple shoe print left by Vivian's son on her delicate stomach. My father's jaw clenched so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. He stood up slowly, turning his back to us, and looked at Grant. "Grant Miller," my father said quietly. "Is this the big project you were bidding on? Is this the greedy commissioner you needed under-the-table cash to smooth over?" Grant fell to his knees right there on the carpet. Thud. "Father-in-law, please, listen to me," Grant cried out, his voice cracking into a desperate, high-pitched whine. "It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. I didn't know. I didn't know June was your daughter. She never told me." "She didn't need to tell you," my father replied coldly. "A man who respects his wife doesn't need her father to be a commissioner to treat her like a human being." Vivian stood frozen beside the ruined dessert table, holding her crying son, Connor. Her face was as pale as ash, her lips trembling violently. She tried to step backward, trying to melt into the crowd of guests, but the commissioner's secretary, Mr. Vance, smoothly stepped behind her, blocking the exit. "Mr. Miller," Mr. Vance said, pulling a tablet from his coat pocket. 10 minutes ago, upon entering the hotel, Commissioner Harrison ordered an immediate, high-level forensic audit of the Miller Group's state tax filings and public contract applications. Mr. Vance clicked the screen. "We have already flagged $120,000 in embezzled joint funds used for this private event, $340,000 in unreported corporate accounts transferred to Ms. Vivian Shaw's personal name, and 3 separate attempts to bribe state procurement officers under the guise of consulting fees." The surrounding guests gasped. The guests who had spent the last hour insulting me, calling me a nanny, a tramp, and a loser, were now frantically backing away from Grant and Vivian, as if they were infected with the plague. "Officer," Commissioner Harrison said, turning his head toward the hotel entrance. 4 uniformed police officers, who had been waiting outside the ballroom doors, marched inside, their heavy boots clicking loudly against the marble floor. "Commission Arthur," the lead officer bowed respectfully. "Take these 2 into custody," my father commanded flatly, pointing at Grant and Vivian. "Charge the man with domestic violence, attempted strangulation, and corporate embezzlement. Charge the woman with child abuse, assault on a minor, and financial fraud." "No, Daddy. Save me," Connor screamed, thrashing as an officer gently guided the boy away from his mother. "Grant, do something." Vivian shrieked as steel handcuffs clicked tightly around her manicured wrists. Her designer gown was wrinkled, her makeup smeared with tears. "You said you owned the city. You said your wife was a nobody." Grant didn't answer her. He kept his forehead pressed against the floor at my father's shoes, sobbing hysterically. June, please," Grant howled, turning his head toward me, his face covered in carpet lint and sweat. "We've been married for 12 years. I built everything for you and Nina. Don't let your father ruin us. Tell him you forgive me." I looked down at the man who had shared my bed for 12 years. I looked at his pathetic, weeping face and felt nothing. No anger, no bitterness, just an absolute frozen void. "You didn't build anything for us, Grant," I said, holding Nina tightly in my arms. "You built a kingdom of lies. And today it crumbles." Within 2 hours, the Ritz-Carlton ballroom was completely cleared. The news of the arrest swept through the city's business district like a wildfire. By midnight, the Miller Group stock had plunged by 60%. Every major bank froze Grant's corporate credit lines, and the state government formally revoked the company's operating license. Nina was taken to the private wing of St. Jude Hospital, where the city's top pediatricians treated her scraped knee, bandaged her bruised stomach, and administered a mild sedative so she could sleep peacefully. I sat beside her bed, holding her small, soft hand. My father walked into the room, setting a hot cup of tea on the nightstand. Beside me, the doctor says she'll have a few bruises for a week, but there's no internal damage to her organs, my father said softly, resting his large hand on my shoulder. She's a strong girl, June. Just like her mother. I was stupid, Dad, I whispered, tears finally leaking from the corners of my eyes as I looked at my daughter's sleeping face. I gave up 12 years of my life. I gave up my career, my ambition, and my youth, thinking I was helping a good man build a future for our family. You weren't stupid, June, my father corrected me firmly. You were loyal. You had faith in a man who promised you the world. He was the one who chose to be a fool. He pulled a thick leather binder from his briefcase and laid it on the bed. This is the complete asset inventory of the Miller Group, my father explained. When you married Grant 12 years ago, you provided 50% of the initial capital using the trust fund your late mother left you. I had my legal team pull the original incorporation papers. I opened the binder. Printed clearly on the first page of the 2012 business registry were two names. Grant Miller 50% and June Harrison 50%. Because Grant committed felony embezzlement, used corporate funds to support a mistress, and attempted to physically assault you in public, my father said. My lawyers have filed an emergency injunction. Under state law, you are exercising your right as co-founder to freeze his voting rights and seize control of the board. I looked at my name on the yellowed document. For 12 years, Grant had brainwashed me into believing I was just a stay-at-home mom, a housewife who contributed nothing, a guest in his house. He had made me feel ashamed for asking for $500 to throw my daughter a birthday party, while he handed hundreds of thousands of dollars to his secretary. He had forgotten that before I became his wife, I was June Harrison, the top graduate of the State University's School of Finance. I closed the binder, wiping the tears from my face. Call Mr. Vance, I told my father, my voice turning rock solid. Schedule an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. I'm taking my company back. At 8:45 a.m. the following morning, the headquarters of the Miller Group was in total chaos. Employees stood huddled in small groups near the elevators, whispering frantically, staring at the breaking news reports on their phones. CEO Grant Miller arrested at Ritz Carlton for embezzlement and domestic violence. State Procurement Commission freezes Miller Group contracts. Mysterious co-founder steps in to take control. Inside the main executive boardroom on the 20th floor, the company's 10 largest shareholders sat around the mahogany table, looking pale, sweat-soaked, and panicked. Among them was the pot-bellied VP who had offered me $3,000 a month at the Ritz-Carlton. He sat in his leather chair, trembling so violently, he could barely hold his coffee cup. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open. I walked inside. I wasn't wearing the old, faded cotton dress I had worn yesterday. I wore a custom-tailored, sharp navy blue suit, my dark hair styled in an elegant, professional bob. My heels clicked against the hardwood floor with calm, lethal precision. Behind me walked Mr. Vance and 3 senior corporate attorneys from Vance and Associates. The shareholders stared at me in absolute shock. June? One senior director stammered, pulling off his glasses. Mrs. Miller, what are you doing here? This is an executive board meeting. I walked straight to the head of the table, the seat where Grant usually sat, and pulled out the leather chair. I didn't sit down immediately. I leaned forward, resting both hands flat on the polished mahogany, looking around the room at the 10 men who had supported Grant while he spent company money on his mistress. As of 8 a.m. today, I announced, my voice echoing clearly through the speaker system. Grant Miller has been formally removed from his position as Chief Executive Officer by order of the State Chancery Court. The pot-bellied VP gasped, dropping his pen. You can't do that. Grant owns 50% of the shares. Grant owned 50% of the shares, I corrected him smoothly. Under Section 4 of the original 2012 incorporation agreement, if any founding partner engages in criminal embezzlement exceeding $100,000, their shares are subject to immediate mandatory buyout by the non-offending founder at book value. Mr. Vance stepped forward, sliding 10 copies of the legal injunction across the table. Ms. June Harrison holds 50% of the original equity, Mr. Vance stated. With the mandatory execution of the buyout clause, she currently controls 75% of the voting shares in this firm. She is now the majority owner and chairman of the board. The room erupted into shocked whispers. June Harrison. Wait, her last name is Harrison? Is she related to Commissioner Arthur Harrison? The pot-bellied VP's face turned gray. He slowly slid down in his chair, trying to hide behind his laptop screen, terrified that I would look at him. I sat down in the chairman's chair, resting my chin on my hands, offering the board a calm, icy smile. "Gentlemen," I said softly, "let's review the company's books. Starting with every single expense report approved by Vivian Shaw over the past 3 years." While I was restructuring the Miller Group, Grant sat in the cold, sterile holding cell of the Central City Jail. He wore an orange jumpsuit, his hair messy, his face covered in dark stubble. Hadn't slept for 48 hours. His public defender sat across the iron table from him, looking through a thick stack of court documents. "Mr. Miller," the public defender sighed, rubbing his temples. "The situation is extremely grim. Your wife's legal team has locked down every single asset you owned. The house, the cars, the bank accounts, they were all tied to the company equity, which has been legally reclaimed by Ms. Harrison." "That's impossible," Grant yelled, banging his handcuffed wrists against the metal table. "She was just a housewife. She didn't work for 12 years. How could she take my company?" "She didn't take your company, Mr. Miller," the lawyer said dryly. "She built it. You just managed it while she raised your child." The iron door of the interrogation room clicked open. A police detective walked inside, holding a white manila envelope stamped with a red seal from the State Forensic Laboratory. Grant looked up, a flash of desperate hope in his eyes. "Is that my bail order? Did Vivian get the money?" The detective gave him a look of pure, unadulterated pity. "No, Mr. Miller," the detective said, pulling a document from the envelope. "This is the result of the court-ordered DNA comparison test requested by Ms. Shaw's former husband during her fraud investigation." Grant frowned, confused. "Former husband? What are you talking about? Vivian was single when I met her." "Miss Shaw was never single," the detective replied flatly, reading from the page. "She was legally married to a man named Marcus Vance until 2 years ago. And as for her 7-year-old son, Connor." The detective laid the paper face up on the metal table in front of Grant. "Genetic comparison result. A probability of paternity between Grant Miller and Connor Shaw, 0% conclusion. Grant Miller is excluded as the biological father. Grant stared at the bold red text on the white paper. The world around him seemed to stop spinning. 0%. The boy he had raised for 7 years. The boy he had showered with luxury, thrown a $120,000 birthday party for at the Ritz Carlton, and called the sole heir to the Miller Group. Wasn't his son. The boy he had used as a reason to abandon his real daughter, Nina, was a stranger's child. "No." Grant whimpered, his voice cracking into a thin, pathetic squeak. "No, no, no. Vivian told me. She told me he was mine. She said he was born on the exact same day as Nina. Ms. Shaw fabricated the birth certificate to match your daughter's birthday." The detective explained, his tone completely flat. "She used the child to extract over $300,000 from your corporate accounts to pay off her real husband's gambling debts in Nevada." "Ard." Grant let out a blood-curdling, horrific scream that echoed off the concrete walls of the jail. He threw himself forward, slamming his head against the iron table over and over again, weeping tears of pure, agonizing, soul-crushing regret. He had thrown away a devoted, brilliant wife who was the daughter of a commissioner. He had let a stranger's child kick and bruise his real, biological daughter. He had traded gold for sewage, and now he was left with nothing but an orange jumpsuit and a lifetime behind iron bars. 1 year later, the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was once again packed with guests, but the atmosphere was completely different. Soft, classical violin music drifted through the air. The room was decorated with thousands of fresh white lilies, pink roses, and glowing fairy lights. A massive 5-tier birthday cake sat in the center of the room, topped with a glittering gold banner. "Happy 11th birthday, Nina." Over 200 guests, including state senators, business leaders, Nina's schoolmates, and my father's colleagues, filled the room, clapping happily as Nina walked out in a custom white silk dress, looking like a little princess. Nina's knee had healed completely, leaving no scars. Her cheeks were rosy, her eyes bright and filled with pure unburdened joy. I stood beside my father at the front of the stage, wearing an elegant emerald green evening gown, holding a glass of champagne. My secretary, Mr. Vance, walked over and handed me a quiet report. "Ms. Harrison," Mr. Vance whispered politely, "the final court proceedings for Grant Miller and Vivian Shaw concluded this morning." I took a slow sip of my drink. What was the verdict? Grant Miller was sentenced to 12 years in state prison for grand larceny, corporate fraud, and domestic assault, Mr. Vance reported. Vivian Shaw received 8 years for child abuse, embezzlement, and forgery. Her son, Connor, has been placed under the care of state child welfare services. I looked down at the report for 2 seconds, then handed it back to Mr. Vance. "Dispose of it," I said softly. "They don't belong in our world anymore." "Mommy," Nina came running across the stage, her silk dress rustling, throwing her small arms tightly around my waist. She looked up at me with a radiant, brilliant smile. Mommy, look. Grandpa bought me a piano. A real Steinway. I crouched down, wiping a speck of frosting from her cheek, pressing a gentle kiss against her forehead. Happy birthday, my sweet girl. I smiled, holding her close against my heart. My father walked over, raising his glass toward the cheering crowd as light poured through the tall crystal windows, washing over us in a warm, golden sea. The trash had been cleared away. The storm had passed. And my daughter and I were finally home.